News that impacts you and your community. 13 on Your Side Evening Plus starts now.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome into Evening Plus. I'm Julia Gorman. Thanks so much for joining us here on 13 Plus. Today was day one of the trial of Christopher Schurr, the former Grand Rapids police officer charged with killing Patrick Lyoya 3 years ago after a traffic stop turned into a struggle. Now, we have been covering this from the very moment it started. We streamed court proceedings from top to bottom today and brought in experts to provide additional analysis. The goal of Evening Plus here during the trial will really be to recap what happened each day and highlight top moments for you so that you can stay up to date no matter how much of our coverage that you are able to tune into. So here's a look at what we'll talk about tonight. Our Lauren Baker will join me in just a moment to kind of give a summary of everyone who we saw called to the stand for this first day of trial. And then our Josh Albertus will join us live from downtown Grand Rapids talking about some demonstrators that we saw for both Christopher Schurr and Patrick Lyoya throughout the day today. Then our Callie Lichter will join us live. She'll kind of go through testimony highlights, some big moments that we saw. And then Josh will join us once again. We heard from Patrick Lyoya's family attorney and also a representative kind of on behalf of the support for former Officer Schurr talking. And then our Riley Mack will join us at the end really to walk you through all of the coverage that we're offering, our website, our streaming service, everything that we're doing so that you can follow along. So we want to first start with our Lauren Baker. Lauren, you have been streaming, anchoring all of our streaming coverage from very early this morning up until now, of course, at this point. So you've been watching every minute as this has unfolded. And we saw 8 people called to the stand today, which we've got some graphics just of everyone who spoke today. If you want to kind of walk us through, who we saw called to the stand today.
Yeah, so first right off the bat, we saw the prosecution and defense give their opening statements, kind of laying their case in front of the jurors or what they're expected to talk about. Even at the start of this, you could feel the emotion from both sides. The prosecution actually objecting to the defense twice in the opening statements with some concern about the defense already making their arguments in opening statements, and the judge did side with that. And then as we went on to the witnesses, we were able to hear from 2 of Patrick Lyoya's friends. They kind of broke down what they saw, one person on the day before and the day of, and then obviously the person who was the passenger in the vehicle, kind of talking about what his perspective was. One of the videos that we have shown in our coverage is the cell phone video of this incident, and so they kind of talked about from their perspective what they saw. We then were able to hear from 2 neighbors, one of which saw the interaction pretty early. He talks about how he was just getting out the shower and saw police lights outside of his window and saw what seems like the beginning to the end of this incident. There was a patch that he missed because he went to go grab his phone in the house, but he talks about what he saw. And then another neighbor who didn't come out initially when the incident was happening, but did come out when he did hear a gunshot. We also heard from an MSP expert who kind of gave the multi-view demonstration of all the video that we saw. And he just basically broke down the software that he used to kind of show the different images that we saw in this case. And that was actually the first time in this trial today that we were able to see all of the video that we're going to be seeing the rest of the case. We then also heard from a crime scene tech. She talked about seeing Schurr the day of, the process that they go through when there's an officer-involved shooting, taking measurements. He had mentioned that I believe either his hand or his wrist was swollen.
We saw some pictures kind of right after, which what they said was typical, as they almost take, evidence of what the officer looked like right after.
And it's only of things that they say is bothering them. So he had mentioned that his hand hurt, so they took evidence of that. And then after that, we heard from the MSP sergeant that actually became in charge of the investigation. And both the defense and prosecution just basically asked, what he saw. And very straightforward questions of, did you execute a warrant to look through his computer? Did you execute a warrant to look at his taser? Those type of things. And then the last person we heard from was the Kent County Chief Medical Examiner, and he talked about the actual autopsy and what goes into deciding how someone is classified, what their death is. And so we saw a lot of testimony during that. We also saw almost a dispute between the attorneys, which did not happen in front of the jurors. But there was some question as to whether the defense could bring in some information in regards to a warrant that was against Lyoya for, I believe it was, I want to say this correctly, it was basically domestic violence or violent situation.
Right, sure.
And the prosecution then came back saying that they could not do that because Schurr did not know of that warrant before the shooting, and Chris Becker actually mentioned a specific code that says that if the defendant does know about the the warrant before, that they could bring that into court, and they did not know that, so the judge did cite with that. So a lot of information day one, definitely.
And it was an interesting mix of people called to the stand where, obviously it was going on for many hours, both before and after lunch, but where things got a little bit of emotional for some people on the stand, and then some testimony that was a bit more matter of fact, more factual, more procedural, just kind of walking through the steps of the many people who were involved in investigating this case.
Most definitely.
Any other, just major points at this point, day one, obviously, that stood out to you? You saw so much, hours and hours worth of testimony today, of those folks that were called to the stand, anyone who stood out especially to you for any reason?
Obviously one of the bigger emotional witnesses was the neighbor that saw everything. Very vocal about how he was feeling that day and about seeing what had happened. Another thing that was important was the talk about the taser. It's very clear that they're going to be focusing on the use of the taser, whether it causes bodily harm and how that could, on either side, make the other person fearful for their life. So that's definitely something that we're expecting to see talk about over and over again, especially when they start to bring in experts to talk about the taser.
Interesting, yeah, because most people focus on, obviously, the shooting at the very end, but to be talking about what happened with the taser before that, that'll be interesting to see play out. And obviously, as you mentioned, emotional testimony today. This is a case that's been so emotional for our entire community, no matter which person you are sort of siding with in the case. And we saw people out early this morning, both for former Officer Schurr and for Patrick Lyoya, holding up signs and demonstrating, which kind of side they're supporting in the case. We want to pull in our Josh Albertus now. He is live outside of the courthouse. He has been on scene there all day. And Josh, you put together a look at all of these demonstrations that we saw. Talk to us a little bit about why people were out there today.
Yeah, Julia, Lauren, I think a lot of what you heard for today, what was signaled, was that this was a lot of language based on what people hope is going to happen and what is going to come out of this trial. Obviously, this was because, this was very early this morning. The trial was just getting underway, so there was no sort of, reaction to what was happening already, because really, in essence, nothing had yet happened in this trial. So we can maybe expect that to change as people kind of shift into a mode of reacting to this trial, but a lot of today was based on what people hope will come out of this trial, and that takes a couple different forms. One of them, a lot of people we were talking to had a hope that this will be, nothing will, break out, that this will be conducted peacefully, outside and inside the courtroom, but also to this hope speech, hopes as to the outcome, of course. The prosecution obviously charging this as an alleged murder, but we heard the defense, of course, as you heard, make the opening case this morning, kind of asserting this was not a matter of murder, but a matter of self-defense. So many people out here this morning, I'm sure, as you may have seen earlier today, carrying what are called those thin blue line flags, often used in support of law enforcement. Now, for many of those people, in support of former Officer Schurr, but at the same time, we saw others. We also spoke to one person out here carrying a sign that said, justice for Patrick Lyoya, the man called Lyoya. He said he knew him personally. He called him a brother, a good person, a good father, and that justice to him would look like a guilty verdict in this case. So obviously the idea of justice in this case depends on, who you are asking out here, but it's certainly runs the point home that, there's plenty of activity going on inside the courtroom as they decide this case. But as we've, sat with almost 3 years now since that murder charge was announced, since it was alleged, that the community has certainly been involved since, and there is also activity not just inside the courtroom, but outside in the community as well. That's certainly something we were hearing today, Julia.
Because we truly believe he's innocent. I'm a retired state trooper's wife, and we've seen the video numerous times, and he's innocent. No matter how the case comes out, he's innocent.
What does this turnout that you have so far, or what you may be expecting, say to you?
I think it's a decent turnout. You missed the big crowd of the night shift that showed up in support, but their support across it's hard because this is Monday. You can't expect everybody to show up that doesn't have a job. I'm luckily I'm a part-timer, so I was able to get off. So.
How would you say you're feeling going into this trial? Would you say you're feeling optimistic that he will be found innocent, or how would you describe what you're feeling?
I believe the jury will come out with the right verdict.
Gotcha. Anything else you want to share with people about why you're out here and what you hope for?
I just hope this city stays peaceful no matter the verdict. You don't need to come out and burn things and do things, all that, just to get heard. You can do it a lot peacefully.
I mean, he was really an outgoing guy, pretty chill, honestly. He was just like everybody else. I mean, anything we ever did around each other a lot, we just, we used to kick it. I used to go to his house sometimes and just chill over there at his house with his kids and things like that. Mainly, he was a father, a good father, and honestly, a great friend. A great friend that I miss a lot. I miss him. So I hope everybody get to see it, and actually everybody know that he was also a good person, So.
And your sign says justice. What does justice look like? Does it look like a guilty verdict, or does it look like something else?
Honestly, a guilty verdict, because it's not right. What happened, it wasn't right. So, yeah, that's really what justice looks like. I mean, honestly, just something for his kids to hold on to, be like, hey, look, maybe the court and whoever it is in charge of the case did something right. That's what we're asking for. Something right in the end that we can stand on and say, he's not going to be doing that to anybody else. It's not fair and it's not right.
Going into the trial, how would you describe what you're feeling? Are you feeling optimistic that that's what's going to happen, or how are you feeling as we actually head into the trial?
Honestly, I'm just hoping, right now I'm just hoping. I'm just hoping for the best, the best outcome, and everything else just go the right way, leave everything to whoever is in charge of it to make the right calls and actually justice be served, I would like to see him being locked up like everybody else is, because what he did wasn't right. So I stand behind that, and then I just want just happiness for the family at the end of the day, because we shed so many tears already, and it's not fair, So I just hope everything goes the right way.
Yeah, some very powerful sound there from people on both sides of this case. We know that there's people that feel both ways. And Josh, we appreciate your questions there. Some really thoughtful questions on, what does justice mean to different people. We're going to check back in with you in just a couple of minutes to talk about some interviews that you did sort of after court got out today. So we will wrap it up with you for this moment, and we appreciate your time. We'll check back in with you in just a couple of minutes. And we saw a lot of those demonstrators out quite early this morning, really early. And there's people who feel both ways about this case. It's a case that affects so much of our community, no matter which side you're on.
And that support has actually gone into the courtroom itself. Obviously, we only have 44 seats in that courtroom, but it was completely packed today, both for people in support of Patrick Lyoya, but also Christopher Schurr. But again, this is a public case, so anyone can go to the courtroom.
Yeah.
It's just very limited seating, so you have to get there early if you want to see this in person.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if demonstrators continue to show up as the trial continues. And on that, we have our Kelly Lichter. She has been live, or rather she's been inside the courthouse watching this every moment and taking detailed notes. Callie, you kind of gathered some highlights from testimony today. Obviously, it's hours and hours of testimony, but walk us through moments that stood out to you.
So something that we've heard since jury selection, something that I feel like I've been repeating for the past week and a half, is that Kent County Prosecutor Chris Becker only really needs to prove two things. You know, it isn't really contested that Schurr fired the shot, that he fired the gun, but Becker is saying that, you know, this was unjustified and that there was an intent to kill or cause great bodily harm there. And the defense is trying to argue back that no, this was self-defense. Schurr was scared for his life and he needed to pull the trigger. He had no other option. So that's when it comes to the prosecutor's witnesses who we heard today. We heard from those 8 witnesses who were talked about a little bit earlier, but there was really 2 that stood out to me, you know, when it's coming to those points that the prosecution is trying to prove there. And one is the one neighbor who saw the majority of the incident, and he kind of said that, you know, he's seen incidents like this happen all around the country, and he was trying to de-escalate the situation so that it wouldn't end up like the way that it did in his eyes. And then you also heard from the Chief Kent County medical examiner, and he said, and one of the things that really stood out to me was he talked all about the bullet wound, the gunshot wound to the back of Patrick Lyoya's head from the gun, which was something that Chris Becker talked about in his opening statement. You know, how much time to think did Schurr have, and that's something that they, you know, are trying to prove or disprove in the courtroom. So we're going to take a look at those highlights, like you said, Julia.
Could you go in a little bit? What did you see? Can you describe a little bit better for the jury what you saw that taser shot? How can you go a little more detail? What you saw the 2 of them doing? How are they positioned? What exactly did you see?
They're like maybe say 3 to 6 feet apart. And he deploys the taser, and then Patrick kind of gets it in his chest and kind of like pulls it out, and then they re-engage, and then that's where he's trying to like keep the taser down.
Who's trying to keep the taser?
Patrick was trying to keep the taser, like he was trying to like keep the taser away from him. And then I ran upstairs to go get my phone like the other gentleman.
Why did you do that?
Because I didn't know that there was anything else that I could do at this point. I felt like I had talked to the officer, I talked to Patrick. And maybe I didn't. Maybe there was more I could have done. But
you say you talked to the officer. What do you mean by that?
I just told them both. I just said, "Hey, stay down, stay down, stay down. Just relax, chill. Hey, get your guy, get your guy." I was just trying to calm the situation, and I think when I went upstairs, if I didn't go upstairs, I think if somebody had been there to oversee the situation, it might have not.
Now going back, now when you complete all this, you get the toxicology results, do you come up with a conclusion in terms of the manner of death?
Yes.
What was the manner of death?
The manner of death in this case was homicide.
And what was the cause of death?
The cause of death was the gunshot wound of the head.
When you say the manner of death being homicide, can you tell the jury what you mean by that?
We have 5 choices for manner of death, and the medical examiner, it's part of our job as medical examiners to make the determination. It's not a legal determination. In other words, just because I call a death a homicide doesn't mean somebody's going to be prosecuted. That's up to the prosecutor. But we have 5 choices, which is homicide, accident, suicide, natural, indeterminate. And so we have to pick from one of those 5 for the manner. Those are mainly it's more of a public health issue for us as medical examiners. In other words, public health agencies such as the state or the Centers for Disease Control can take our data and use it to determine like how many deaths are accidental in the country or or any population that they're studying.
And we have Callie with us once again. And I think, and feel free to argue with me here, ladies. I feel Wayne Butler's testimony was some of the most emotional that we saw on the stand today. Callie, would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely, for sure. When it comes to, being so emotional about what he saw, there was even times where there had to be, some pauses, some saying, oh, maybe, let's calm down a little bit. Let's get back to, the recounting of events. But I think that kind of speaks to what a lot of people have been saying is an emotional day, is emotional video. And what he recounted that day, I forgot the exact word that he said. It's been a couple of hours now and I don't have my notes in front of me. But he was using some very powerful words to describe what he saw. And I remember when someone asked, have you seen the video since then? I think it was the defense during cross-examination. He was like, I've only seen it as many times as a human should see that video. So I think, being on that witness stand today, not only getting questioned by the prosecution, but also, cross-examined by the defense, kind of reopened some emotions. I know he also talked about his experience being a black man and how he felt for Lyoya in that moment. I kind of talked about that before we rolled on the soundbite. He's seen a lot of incidents like this across the country with other men of color, and so to relive it, to see it in basically his front yard, I think made him just really emotional when that wound was opened back up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Callie, well, we thank you for your time. We know it's been a long day, and you'll be, of course, back there tomorrow. So thanks so much. And we are going to once again bring in Josh Albertus now because sort of on the latter half of today, after court was adjourned for the day, we heard from Ben Johnson. You've interviewed him several times. Many of us in the newsroom have the attorney for Patrick Lyoya's family. And then we've also seen State Rep Jim DeSana also kind of coming out on the opposite side, showing support for former Officer Schurr. And we heard from both of them sort of after court had called out today. We can pull Josh in now once again. Josh, you were able to gather those interviews. We're sort of running out of time in just a couple of minutes here, so give us a quick look at why both of those people spoke out after court was adjourned, and then we've got a little bit of your interviews with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Julia. When it comes to Ben Johnson, again, he has been representing the Lyoya family civilly, but not criminally. So he was not part of the prosecution team when it comes to this case, but he was in the courtroom. He was speaking with the family today. He was with them, and so he did witness what was happening from inside the courtroom. So he came out to reporters after the day was kind of adjourned for the day and did, basically commend the prosecution's efforts in his view when it comes to this case. And you got that one side of the story, but also, as you mentioned, this morning as this trial was kind of kicking off, Representative DeSana, he is actually from the east side of the state, but he came here today. He was announcing a bill he said he had recently introduced that when it comes to self-defense law here in Michigan, he says currently, defendants, what he's telling us and what he told reporters is that defendants have to prove in civil court that their use of force was justified even if cleared criminally, and he said that is this bill would change that standard to have a presumptive immunity when it comes to civil cases as well. So as it turns out, politics made a turn here today as well as he came out and announced that, but you're hearing both sides there. As we heard from the demonstrators, we're also hearing kind of, the inner workings, whether it was inside the courtroom or even inside the legislature, as to the surroundings of, even if it's not, directly connected to this case, it's just like the atmosphere that we find ourselves in now as this trial is now playing out after a lot of anticipation in the years that led up from the initial allegation of murder.
Without any question, we believe today was overwhelmingly favorable for the prosecution, and that absolutely, without any doubt, the gunshot wound to the back of the head was unnecessary and excessive force.
While someone defending themselves has a moral responsibility to do what they possibly can before eliminating the threat, an ordered society must also defend those who, for the sake of their own life, for the sake of the lives of others, must act in a split second to use necessary force to stop their attackers.
And I think that kind of, what we're seeing there kind of just emphasizes the fact that, we have heard a lot from the community about this, obviously, but, it kind of brings back into the focus, the wider attention that this kind of case has outside of Grand Rapids, outside of the community. You have a lot of other people paying attention to this case, too, and how it plays out. And, of course, we're going to keep you updated every step of the way. But for now, I'm going to toss it back to you, Julie and Lauren.
All right, Josh, thanks so much. And you have been streamlining all of our streaming coverage. We've also got a minute-by-minute look up on our website, several different web articles that we're putting out each day. And our Riley Mack, she's on our digital team here, but she's also been inside the courthouse, sort of giving a minute-by-minute look that you can follow along on our live blog on our website. She joins us live now. And Riley, I wanted you to kind of walk our viewers through how that process works, just in the many different ways that we are telling this story and keeping the community informed.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me tonight. I kind of have a unique role here. Callie and Josh are our reporters who have been covering the trial, but I'm in there writing a live blog of the article. The judge in this case kind of sees the high profile nature of it and set some ground rules for how the public, the viewers like you, can get that information. So she set that live stream, the things that you're watching throughout the day, that's on a 30-minute delay. So you're seeing it 30 minutes after it actually happens in the courtroom. Same with photos. That's on a 30-minute delay as well. And anyone who's in that courtroom cannot have technology. So that information is not getting out immediately. However, I'm inside that courthouse and I'm live blogging without the delay of all the information that's happening. And I'm live blogging the photos, the evidence, the key evidence, the questions even that attorneys are asking. It's the only way you can get that live information. We've got different sections for each witness in that live article on our website. Today's was 8 witnesses, so there's different sections for each one of them. There's photos of the witnesses, there's key evidence, there's questions that the attorneys are asking, how they're building their case. Even the attorneys arguing over what evidence can be allowed in the case, like they did today with the domestic violence charges against Patrick Lyoya, whether that was relevant or not. We've got all that information, that what each attorney was arguing in court in that live article on our website. Today's article even started before the trial, who was outside gathering to show who they were siding with in this, and then up till the last witness, which was the medical examiner. The beauty of this article is that you don't have to watch 45 minutes of cross-examination to get the information that you want from this trial. I just have a little blurb with all the highlights that you need to know that happened with that witness. And that's on our website, 13onyourside.com. It's minute-by-minute coverage. If you're more of a video person, that's okay, no worries. You can still watch that live stream of the trial throughout the entire trial on our 13 Plus app. And you can watch that at any time, but the live blog will be there every day, minute-by-minute coverage without that delay. I will be working on that every day. You can find that at 13onyourside.com on the homepage, the main article every single day of this trial.
Yeah, we have so much of our team working to provide as much coverage as possible. So Riley, we so appreciate your perspective, and you're in the courthouse. You're there with Josh and with Callie, really seeing everything unfold ahead of that delay. So that blog is a great resource for the community. So we will wrap it up with you. Thanks so much for joining us here on Evening Plus. And of course, this is only day one, so walk us through when everything streaming-wise will kick off tomorrow with you once again.
So court starts at 8:30. We'll start our stream at 8:30, but like Riley mentioned, we are on a court-mandated 30-minute delay.
Right.
And so you'll be able to see the court proceedings start around 9 o'clock. Depending on whether they start right at 8:30. But again, we'll start the streaming process 8:30, kind of recapping what we saw today and what we can expect tomorrow as well.
And we saw today too several breaks taken, or short recesses besides that longer lunch break. So it's a very fluid process that your role really is to walk our viewers through, every minute of that on 13 Plus.
Yeah, something that I thought was interesting that one of the experts said today is that, this case, like many cases, will take a life of its own.
Sure.
If things get too tense, the judge may say, okay, let's take a 15-minute break. Or, if things are going too long, they might decide to break then. Even today, they broke early. They were supposed to go to 4:45 and they broke at 3:53. So things can change every single day.
A very evolving situation. Well, Lauren will be there to guide you through every moment. We, of course, have our live blog that Riley and the rest of our digital team is working on. We're really all working so hard to provide comprehensive coverage. And then every day of the trial here on 13 Plus, you can expect what you saw tonight, sort of a recap, kind of putting a bow on everything that we saw happen that day for you if you need sort of a quicker version. So we thank you so much for joining us here on Evening Plus. Lauren, thanks so much for being here, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.